Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got a great show for you today. Robbie, what do we have?
Well, Max Alvarez and Liz Wolfe are in for Team Rising. We'll discuss some of the revelations behind the CDC's recently shortened 5-day quarantine recommendation. And Bad Faith podcast host Brianna Joy Gray discusses Biden's sinking approval ratings that's fallen below Vice President Kamala Harris, actually.
In the big news from last night, former Nevada Senator Harry Reid died at 82 after a battle with pancreatic cancer. The death was announced by political reporter John Ralston, who called Reid, quote, probably the most important elected official in Nevada history. Reid was one of the Senate's longest-serving majority leaders and a Democrat who played a central role in getting Obama's biggest legislative goals accomplished. President Biden said of Reid in a statement, quote, during the 2 decades we served together in the United States Senate and the 8 years we worked together while I served as vice president, Harry met the marker for what I've always believed is the most important thing by which you can measure a person, their action and their word.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer tweeted out his condolences, saying that Reid was one of the most amazing individuals I've ever met and that he fought fearlessly for the poor and middle class. Our own Ryan Grimm zeroed in on Schumer's message, saying that Reid used to ask people where they went to college, and the better the school, the less interested he was in the person. He wanted people who fought to get where they are. He had a sharp class edge to him that is mostly gone in D.C. among Democrats.
Yeah, and Harry, and so in Washington, there's a tendency when somebody dies to elevate them to a pantheon of greatness, and then a week later, everybody gets honest about what their real life was. I think Harry Reid is the least sentimental person on the planet, and he wouldn't even want that. He'd be like, just say it all, like get it out there. I don't care. I'm in the rocks in the sand now. It's fine. Probably what he would probably say is the darkest mark on his entire career was his vote for the Iraq War, which he semi-apologized for in an interview with me and Sam Stein. So Sam Stein and I, we kind of, when we were back at the Huffington Post, we would do 1 or 2 sit-down interviews with Reid a year, which were these wild, kind of off the wall. You never knew what the guy was going to say. It was in one of those interviews where he said, and by the way, Mitt Romney has never paid any income taxes.
Right.
If you remember that, if you remember that one, we're like, where'd you hear this? It's like, I've got sources. He had already said it turns out, on the Senate floor. And then later he said it again on the Senate floor. After our story came out, he's like, well, the word is out. Like, the word is out. You put the word out.
Right. A claim that was later rated pants on fire false by the Washington Post, and then
paid some taxes. If you say somebody paid 0 taxes, that's going to be pants on fire false, because all you need to show is like, I paid $15 in taxes. He paid an extremely low tax rate.
You paid sales tax, right? Everybody pays that.
He paid sales tax. But in one of those interviews, for the first time, and he was the first major official to say that he was wrong for having voted for the Iraq War, and he apologized, but then he added the little caveat, I'm sorry that I was misled, and did get reflective about the harm that was caused by the war, but still wanted to put some of that on being misled. When there were people, plenty of people at the time, who saw the same information he saw, or were like, there's no reason to go to war. So I think that is probably the darkest mark on him. Probably a bunch of our viewers will never forgive him for for organizing in 2016 against Bernie Sanders in the Democratic Nevada caucus. But Harry Reid was a machine player and an establishment politician. Like, that was what he was going to do, and that was what he was very good at.
And that's what he eventually said about that line about Romney's taxes. He was asked about it in an interview, and he was like, well, Romney didn't win, did he?
Romney didn't win. In 2016, he said, look, I'm going to endorse whoever wins the caucus. And then he did everything he possibly could behind the scenes to make sure that Hillary won.
Right.
In 2020, when in the day leading, I think it was the day before the caucus, I reached out to him and I said, in 2016 you said you would endorse whoever was going to win the caucus. Will you say that again in 2020? Because it was clear that Bernie was well ahead. And he just texted back, no. which is also very Harry Reid.
That wasn't reflective, I don't think, of like personal animosity behind the scenes.
Bernie.
He was right.
In fact, most of his staff by that point, he was retired by this, but toward the end of his career, a ton of his staff were Bernie orbit people. Like he had drifted more towards Bernie when it came to his own ideological politics, but he was still a machine politician loyal to the establishment. And in Nevada now, there's this big war where the DSA literally took over the apparatus of the state party in state elections as a result of Bernie winning. And Reid's machine was able to move all of the money out right before they took it over. So just he's a constant kind of power player. But and I think the left could do well to kind of learn from him because of his ability to use power and to embrace kind of tactical efficiency and finding leverage and finding ways to beat your opponents.
Ultimately presiding over massive legislative victories during the Obama administration. The last time passing stuff was a routine happening on the Senate floor.
And to get reelected in Nevada to the Senate in 2010, the Tea Party wave, is not nothing. And in order to do that,
lucked out on what's her face, Sharon Angle.
So there was a more establishment candidate that he probably would have lost to, but he very actively intervened in the Republican primary to do the Pied Piper thing, where he got Sharon Angle nominated as the Republican, and still only won by 1,000 or 2,000 votes. So all of his elections were extremely close. But he's one of these rare things in Washington at this point. Well, he's not there anymore, but a Democrat who had actual working class consciousness. Like I said in that post, he would ask people, he would try to figure out where people came from. The easiest proxy for that is what college did you go to. Now, you can grow up in difficult circumstances, make your way to an Ivy League school. That's an exception, so he's willing to, like, if you don't have much time, what college you go to. If you said a state school that he'd never heard of, or any state school, you're like, okay, interesting. Because if you were in his orbit at this point, you probably did something that you got out of whatever difficult circumstances you were in. But I mean, he had a rough. So I've been to Searchlight.
Just where he's from.
Just absolutely barren moonscape, middle of nowhere, like one stoplight town. If there might not even be a stoplight. There's a Harry Reid Elementary School. Across from Harry Reid Elementary School is a graveyard where he will probably be interred, but where his grandparents and his father are. There's a sign, and I wrote about this for the Huffington Post. There's a sign outside the graveyard that says "Human burials only, no pets or dogs." Just a chain link fence, and then it's just a bunch of rocks and sand. And the way we found his father's gravestone was there's a rock about a foot wide across with an H carved into it, and then an R off of the H. And his father was a rock miner. Like, literally, that was his job. He was a rock miner. And he had gone all over town and scratched HR everywhere in Searchlight. And as they were digging his grave, they found this foot-long rock that had HR carved in it. They're like, perfect headstone. He later committed suicide. Oh, no. And Harry Reid was called to come home and found him with the gun still in his hand. He was an alcoholic. He beat his wife. There's a story in Reid's memoir of Harry Reid's father is beating his wife, and he says to his brother when he's 14 years old, he says, "Let's take him." And the two of them bum rush their father and like pin him to the ground for 15 minutes while he struggles against them. He then later becomes commissioner of gaming in Las Vegas, and the mob tries to kill him. This is, of course, he was also a boxer, as a lot of people know. And so, soft-spoken dude, but with that kind of background.
Well, and we wanted to make note of the fact that when he was 55, he grew interested in the government's handling, actually, and knowledge of UFOs, despite strong pushback from his inner circle, urging him to stay the hell away from that. He attended meetings with scientists, engineers, former CIA, former Army colonels, and Apollo astronauts. Reid ultimately enlisted his powerful friends in Congress to fund hush-hush research inside the Defense Department, and was revealed publicly in 2017. Reid was proud of his work in this department, saying that, quote, "We made a tremendous amount of progress in legitimizing the Pentagon's research into UFOs and destigmatizing the subject in public discourse."
I mean, this is a case where one person changing their mind on an issue
actually does
has
something.
real contingent effect on the world, because he was in a position of power as Senate Majority Leader to be able to say, you want this budget through? Well, guess what? I want a couple $1,000,000 to study UFOs. And I've been convinced that this is something interesting. I don't think it's a coincidence that he's from Nevada.
Right.
And spent so much time kind of staring up in the stars.
The emptiness around you. You look up.
And the stars there. And that, and he is the driving force, I think, for why we're talking about UFOs now. Because if he hadn't put that money into the Pentagon, if he hadn't helped create this kind of agency or department or whatever it is inside the Pentagon, you wouldn't have these reports. You wouldn't have the coverage. Of course, people have been talking about UAPs, UFOs for decades, but
they have. But there's certainly much more government, political interest, much more, motivation to actually have something looked at and have hearings and that kind of thing.
His other legacy is he was able to. He resisted changing the Senate filibuster rules for the first couple of years. But eventually, facing an inability to get judicial appointments and executive appointments through, he changed those rules in 2017, and I included some of this in my book. He was prepared to call on Hillary Clinton in the Senate to just get rid of the filibuster. Of course,
that didn't work out.
They decided not to call for that at that point, but he did then in 2020, saying, like, look, the Senate is broken. Like, I love the Senate, but the Senate is broken. If you're going to do anything, and he said, if you're going to do anything about climate change, then you're going to have to do something about the filibuster.
Yeah, and he wouldn't just let random things be brought to the floor without his authority and his permission.
Right.
Something that the Republicans complained about, McConnell complained about, but has been totally continued. Sort of the new set the model for what the modern Senate leadership looks like and how the Senate operates, and for better or for worse.
He really leaned into climate too. When I was out in Searchlight, I interviewed a groundskeeper of his, and he said that when Sarah Palin, I don't know if you remember this, in 2010, Sarah Palin and the Tea Party held a big rally in Searchlight, which is hilarious because it's like impossible to get there. A bunch of RVs came to Searchlight to protest Harry Reid, and Reid told him, "I want that windmill up on my ranch before they get here. I don't care if it works. I don't care what it takes to make it happen. I want that windmill up, and I want a giant middle finger pointing right at Sarah Palin when she's here." And so the kind of metastasization of the climate war into culture has been going on for a long time. And Harry Reid was happy to play that.
Oh, fascinating. Well, thank you for that, Ryan. Stay with us, because next we'll talk about what's on our radars. You won't want to miss that.